A central question for researchers, policymakers, religious organizations, and philanthropists has been, what is poverty? In this video, we will argue for the replacement of the current official poverty measure in the U.S. with one based heavily on the supplemental poverty measure developed by the National Academy of Sciences, with certain modifications that stress the use of a capabilities approach linked to income inequality. Several definitions of poverty have arisen over the years, yet there is still no consensus. According to John Iceland, absolute poverty measures and defines poverty at a threshold below which an individual ought to be considered economically deprived and faces material hardship. The current official poverty measure in the U.S., which is typically used to determine whether a family qualifies for benefits, is an absolute poverty measure. Relative poverty defines poverty in terms of the society. Rather than focusing on material hardship, relative poverty measures are purely comparative. In Europe, relative poverty measures are based on some percentage of the median income. Relative poverty proponents argue that true material hardship is rare in well-developed countries, and therefore an absolute measure is arbitrary. They argue that relative poverty is able to measure social inclusion, or whether one is able to participate in society as a dignified, respected, and shameless manner, and to share the standard of living common to that society. Often, because they are based on median incomes, relative poverty rates are closely tied to income inequality. It is therefore possible that those in relative poverty in a well-developed society are in reality living quite well, and that people in a society facing large income inequality may be facing true hardship despite being above the poverty line. Both of these definitions focus on income inadequacy. Absolute poverty focuses on inadequacy for a certain standard of living below which is considered material hardship. Relative poverty focuses on inadequacy for social inclusion and a respectable standard of living. Some ethicists and researchers argue for a capabilities-based approach to defining poverty. Martha Nussbaum defines capabilities as the freedoms or opportunities created by the combination of personal abilities and the political, social, and economic environment. Nussbaum lists 10 central capabilities which she feels are essential to human dignity, including life, bodily integrity, play, and material control, which includes property rights. A capabilities approach tends to prioritize human dignity over survival or material hardship as a threshold to poverty.
We need to measure poverty so that the people who are in need of help receive the help they need. People struggle every day to get by, and if we measure poverty, those people have some support to lean on. We need to accurately measure poverty regardless of the policy feasibility the research has given back. By measuring poverty, the inequalities between the poor and others are shown, and the issues poverty entail come out into the light, so we can address them. Measuring poverty helps to drive the policies forward so that people know what needs work and what is working, instead of blindly going forward. Measuring poverty is how we know who and how to help.
A capabilities approach has the advantages of addressing the ends of income, the reasons for needing money, skipping the middleman of income itself. Some argue that, in doing so, it fails to address poverty as traditionally defined in the vernacular by eliminating income inadequacy as a requirement. Amartya Sen, however, argues that this can be remedied by assigning minimum income to achieve capability thresholds. However, there is no guarantee that all central capabilities can be reached by money alone, such as bodily integrity or emotional well-being. Furthermore, capability thresholds such as those for affiliation and political control are sometimes harder to pinpoint and measure than basic sustenance thresholds such as food and shelter. The current official poverty measure used in the U.S. is absolute. That is, it changes over time only with inflation and is based on sustenance rather than social integration or standard of living. Molly Orzbansky of the Census Bureau derived the OPM in the 1960s. She based the measure on the USDA's Emergency Food Plan, a basket of foods designed to meet temporary nutritional needs. Orzbansky multiplied this number by 3 because the average family spent about 1/3 of income on food in 1955. The OPM is adjusted for family size, but family is strictly defined as all individuals residing together who are related by birth, marriage, or adoption. In order to measure family income, the OPM uses gross pre-tax cash income only to calculate family resources. The benefit of the OPM is clear. It's extremely easy to measure. Cash income is compared to thresholds that change only with family size. The catch is the imprecision. The OPM is based on statistics from 1960s and 50s, which are now outdated. It is now estimated that food is only 1/6 of a family's budget, meaning tripling a bare minimum would provide only half of a full budget. The OPM does not account for an individual's special circumstances, such as disease or injury, child care, etc., thus ignoring most central capabilities. The OPM does not account for geographic differences in cost, which any New Yorker will tell you are massive. Finally, it does not account for the modern household and family, which often include people not related by birth, marriage, or adoption, and individuals supporting their children who do not live with them. Clearly, the official poverty measure of the United States is in need of an overhaul.
The Supplemental Poverty Measure, or SPM, is another major way to measure poverty. In the United States, SPM is used primarily for statistical research only. Many components of the SPM are not in the OPM, and those components make SPM very appealing. SPM takes into account in-kind benefits, the tax each person has to pay, one's non-discretionary income, difference in geography, and near cash benefits. In-kind benefits include childcare, welfare, and programs like SNAP. Non-discretionary benefits include any kind of taxes, work-related transportation and childcare, and programs like MOOP. In addition, the SBM is updated every 5 years according to the Food, Clothing, Shelter, and Utilities, or FCSU, of the 33rd percentile of the United States. There are many pros to the SBM. Some of the biggest include the more individualized and flexible approach to the measurement. Because of all the components of SBM, many different people are included in the measure, catering to different backgrounds and needs, different individuals. The measure adjusts quinquennially, showing the flexible nature, instead of just adjusting to inflation. SBM also shows the short-term alleviation of the assistance policies because of the people included and excluded from the measure. SBM defines a household as more than just people who share the same blood, but people who live at the same address. Short, on the topic of households, wrote, "The family unit should include all related individuals who live at the same address, as well as any children who are cared for by the family and any cohabitors and their children." Every 5 years, the SBM also updates the threshold budget based on FCSU, as well as, according to Short, a small additional amount to allow for other needs. These needs include everything from household supplies and personal care to work-related transportation. Finally, SBM's quasi-relative approach ensures social participation. While the pros outweigh the cons for SBM, the cons still exist. Taking the in-kind and other benefits into account may cause many people that would be included into poverty under the OPM out of poverty just because of the benefits they receive, even if these people are still struggling with other facets and capabilities like play and time with the family. In addition, if someone is measured with those benefits, how does SBM determine if they still need those benefits and if the people will be okay without them? Also, the SBM does not make specifications to things such as household needs or supplies and transportation to work. It brings many questions like, what if someone buys a car for work transportation when they can take the bus? What if they take a job farther away from home when there's a job that pays the same closer? Our revised official poverty measure uses the SBM, but with multiple modifications. The first thing we would modify about the SBM approach is eliminate the benefits and income. This change is easily calculated, and it would clear up the gray area about who needs the benefits and who is fine without them. That way, more benefits would go to other people that require them. Another modification would be to limit the wages counted in family income to a certain number of hours per week to prevent people from being considered out of poverty simply due to the tragic choice between failing to provide materially and working unreasonable hours. With more free time, the worker can go home to his family and spend that quality time that every child deserves from their parents and every husband deserves of his wife and vice versa. Many capabilities would also be addressed by this, such as play and emotions. Pay stubs could easily be used to measure hourly wage or number of hours worked. The most expensive modification we would make is modify the work-related transportation gray area under the SBM non-discretionary expenses. We would have to resort to transportation costs on a cents per mile basis based on the area, calculating costs based on geographic area and the availability of public transportation. Our final modification to the SBM is to consider loan payments not already considered as a non-discretionary expense, such as education and credit cards. Some may argue that these were often discretionary at the time, but we argue that many were made as part of a tragic choice, and those debts are restricting families' capabilities today regardless. Once on assistance, additional discretionary loans will not be counted.
Our revised official poverty measure links a capabilities approach to income inadequacy. It is more individualized than the OPM or even the SPM, as apparent in the more in-depth transportation cost assessment. Like the SPM, it is more up to date and incorporates capabilities such as health and social affiliation over the OPM. By only including wages made in 60 hours per week, we encourage the fostering of capabilities, including play and emotion. By discounting debt payments from resource calculations, we grant people who had no other option a second chance and the capability for material control over their property. While it is true that the ROPM would fall short of measuring all central capabilities, it would create thresholds for many without compromising the traditional financial based definition of poverty. And, while it is relative to the extent that it is linked to the FCSU cost of the 33rd percentile, it is only relative in terms of necessities, ensuring social inclusion and an adaptable standard of living without devolving entirely into a measure of income inequality. The ROPM would help the U.S., state, and local governments to generate even more precise data and to help people achieve full dignity through capability.